Welcome to the Empowered Flow podcast. I'm Tris Alexandra, holistic clinical nutritionist, women's health and menstrual cycle educator, and mama. Join me and experts in nutrition, fitness, mindset, and holistic healing as we explore conversations to open your mind to a different way of thinking on all things women's health, hormones, periods, cyclical living, and fertility. Whether you're seeking knowledge, inspiration, or a supportive community, you've found your tribe. Let's dive in. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. I'm going to talk today all about estrogen dominance and detoxification. So really important topic because estrogen dominance is one of the most common hormone imbalances that I see and one of the ones that contributes to a lot of the signs and symptoms we see around our menstrual cycles. Now, I'm going to talk about what estrogen dominance is, what the benefits of estrogen are, because we tend to think of estrogen, or it gets talked about like the big bad hormone, but it actually has a lot of benefits and functions that are really important. It's just that we need to be able to make it and then eliminate it and have estrogen in healthy levels. I'm going to talk to you about what these symptoms of estrogen dominance are, the causes and contributing factors, and how we can then support healthy estrogen levels. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into something called the Dutch test, which is the dried urine testing for comprehensive hormones. And I want to talk to you about why this test is so beneficial to help us understand how our body is making, metabolizing, and eliminating estrogen, as well as a number of other hormones, and how it differs so much from just general blood hormone testing. It can give us so much in-depth information into what's happening hormonally in our body, and then how we can support it on a really personalized and specific level on what we can use from a nutrition and a nutritional medicine, so like supplement and even lifestyle point of view for supporting the balance of hormones and eliminating and resolving a lot of those symptoms. Also really helpful for women with like endometriosis, fibroids, polycystic ovarian syndromes, and a number of other factors. So let's start with what estrogen dominance is, because quite often we think of estrogen dominance, or you might hear that and think high estrogen levels. And yes, it can be because your estrogen is too high. Generally, that's because we're not clearing estrogen effectively. And we clear estrogen through the liver and the bowels. So we need to have really effective liver detoxification. So phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification, which I'll talk to you about. And then we also need to have effective phase 3 detoxification, which is our elimination channels. And we predominantly eliminate estrogen through our bowels, which means we also need to have a really healthy gut and really healthy gut microbiome. And I'll talk about how the gut microbiome can recycle estrogen in order to actually eliminate it and to not have these high levels. And then estrogen dominance is also when estrogen is high in relation to how much progesterone you have. So your total estrogen levels may not be high, but you may actually have low progesterone. And then because of that, that means your estrogen is too high, because estrogen and progesterone do need to be in a healthy balance, in a specific ratio. I kind of liken it to they're like the yin and the yang of our cycle. If you haven't listened to it already, go back to episode 23. It's all about low progesterone solutions for women. So I talk about the importance of and the benefits of progesterone, and I talk about just that yin and yang balance between estrogen and progesterone. Now, when it comes to estrogen, really we want to be able to effectively make it, use it, and lose it. So make our estrogen, use it for all the functions that it does. We have estrogen receptors all through the body, affecting so many different organs and systems. And then we want to be able to lose it, to get rid of any of the excess estrogen that we no longer need. Now let's talk about what the benefits of estrogen are, because like I said, we tend to think of it as this negative hormone or this bad hormone that causes all of the symptoms, but it actually has a lot of really protective benefits in the body. It is one of the main hormones of our menstrual cycle, so estrogen and progesterone. It's most dominant in the follicular phase, so the first half of the menstrual cycle. We do still see it in the second half as well, but it's really dominant in the first half because that's where it's doing all of its work to build up the uterine lining and to develop and mature an egg for ovulation. ovulation. So they're two of the functions and benefits that estrogen has, is promoting that growth of the uterine lining and promoting the development and maturation of an egg, which means that it's also contributing to ovulation. Estrogen also helps to promote healthy libido. It is very protective for our bones, our bone health, and that's why we start to see osteoporosis later in life when estrogen levels drop off. It is very protective for brain function, so for both function, cognition, and mental sharpness or mental clarity. It is supportive for healthy skin and hair. It is protective for our heart and our cardiovascular system. And it is also supportive for our metabolism. Now, some of these symptoms, or not some of, but these symptoms that we can experience with estrogen dominance can include heavy periods. So like I said, estrogen is proliferative, so it's growing and building up that lining of the uterus. If there's too much estrogen, then that lining becomes really thick and it contributes to really heavy periods. It can also cause short cycles. So I tend to see if your cycle is under 25 days, that's probably where we're looking at a estrogen dominance picture, potentially low progesterone, but certainly estrogen dominance there. It contributes to PMS, so premenstrual syndrome. So any of those symptoms that you experience in the week leading up to your period. It can contribute to cyclic breast tenderness or breast pain and fibrocystic breasts. So again, because estrogen's proliferative, it can contribute to the growth of those fibroids in the breast and also in the uterus. So if you've ever been diagnosed with a uterine fibroid, we would certainly want to look at your hormone levels, your estrogen, and how you are metabolizing and detoxifying and eliminating estrogen. It can contribute to premenstrual related headaches, so headaches leading up to your period or around the onset of your period. I also have see it around headaches around ovulation. With weight gain, with estrogen dominance, we see sort of weight gain, particularly around the hips and the buttocks. And I also see a lot of estrogen dominance in conditions like endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS. Now and adenomyosis, I should say as well. With PCOS, it's not always an estrogen dominant picture. Sometimes it is because many women with PCOS are not ovulating regularly, so they're getting the low progesterone and in turn high estrogen dominance. Sometimes the estrogen is actually quite low, so it just depends on the woman there. The other time we see a lot of estrogen dominance is in perimenopause. So if you are 35 plus, particularly if you are 40 plus, now, perimenopause spans across a really long period of time. It can be, up to a decade of hormonal shifts and changes that are happening before the onset of menopause. And many times we don't recognize the signs and symptoms or realize that we're in perimenopause because we think of perimenopause as something that will happen to us when we're older. And we don't realize how early those shifts and changes in our hormones can happen. But what happens, in our late 30s and early 40s is we start to see the reversal of what happened at puberty. We start to see a winding down of our reproductive system. And what happens with that is estrogen can fluctuate quite wildly. So you might have really, really high estrogen some cycles, and then it might drop, some other cycles. But because of that fluctuation and because of those high levels of estrogen, we will start to see some of those signs and symptoms of estrogen dominance, like worsening of PMS symptoms, heavy painful periods. We might experience flooding or gushing with our period, weight gain, hot flushes, night sweats. And that's all because of that estrogen dominance. Also at the same time with perimenopause, we're seeing a decline in progesterone. So again, we're losing that balance between estrogen and progesterone. So let's talk about the causes of estrogen dominance, because there can be a number of factors that contribute to it. But one of the biggest things I want you to understand is that in order for our body to process estrogen or metabolize estrogen, it metabolizes it through our detoxification pathways. So there is 3 phases to detoxification. I'll talk more about this in a moment, but essentially phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification happen in the liver, and that is where our body is metabolizing and detoxifying estrogen. It then sends it to the bowels, so the digestive system, for elimination, and elimination is phase 3 of our detoxification pathway. Now, our liver requires several amino acids, so from protein, amino acids, minerals, and vitamins in order to effectively detoxify, in order for these processes to work effectively. And then also when you think about the elimination side of things through the bowels, we need to have an effective digestive system, an effective gut health and bowel function so that we are eliminating properly. Now, I always find it interesting when, hear a lot about people talking about online, like, you don't need to do a detox. Your body detoxifies itself effectively. You shouldn't be going on a detox, or, detoxes, they're not good. And what I want to say to that is 2 things. Firstly, yes, your body detoxifies itself every day. It detoxifies itself effectively until it doesn't. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the digestive system, you have a digestive system that digests and absorbs and eliminates nutrients, and it does that effectively until it doesn't, until there's something that is inhibiting that from functioning properly. And then we start to see signs and symptoms. So in the gut, we might start to see, the bloating and the abdominal pain and changes to bowel movements like constipation and loose bowels. Same thing happens with our liver. It does a great job of detoxifying and eliminating things out of the body until it's not so effective anymore, and we need to actually support those processes from happening, support those processes to occur really effectively, because there are a number of things that contribute to a sluggish liver and sluggish detoxification pathways, particularly in our modern lifestyle. So there's that I want to talk about detox. The second thing is that when we see these like juice cleanses and quote unquote detox, quick fixes, most of the time they are not actually detoxifying or helping your body to detoxify. If you think about and I'll talk about why, but just if you think about, I mentioned the liver needing amino acids and vitamins and minerals to detoxify. When we look at something like a juice cleanse, for example, there is absolutely no protein and no amino acids in there, which means it's not actually providing the liver what it needs to function effectively and to detoxify effectively. So often when I see women trialing these juice cleanses that are marketed as detox, or supplements that are marketed as detox, they're lacking the actual substances that we need from food, like amino acids, in order for our liver to detoxify effectively. Now, yes, it may, if you go on a juice cleanse, it may feel like it's doing something or working, because, often they'll, I've had clients that have done it before, and they say, oh, but I lost weight, or I felt, less bloated, and I felt, my stomach was flatter. Well, of course, you haven't had proper food in your system for a week, and you've just been having juices. So your digestive system is essentially empty of fibers and all sorts of things. But it's not actually helping you to detoxify. We can support those detoxification pathways, absolutely. And there are foods and nutrients and supplements that can certainly help to do that. And then a really, really big one is lifestyle factors. So taking away the things that are actually placing burden on the liver and making it sluggish in the first place, which I will talk about in a moment. And then the second part, because I'm talking about causes of estrogen dominance, the second part to this is your digestive system and your gut health. Because I spoke about phase 3 of detoxification being elimination through our bowels. And our digestive system is really an important organ for estrogen elimination. Our microbiome in particular, so we've got trillions of bacteria in our microbiome, but there is a subset of species in the microbiome that metabolizes estrogen and sends it out for elimination. It's called the estrobolome. Now, if we have dysbiosis, so an imbalance of bacteria in there, or unhealthy pathogenic bacteria that are thriving and displacing beneficial bacteria, we're going to have poor digestive health and a disrupted or dysbiotic microbiome, and that is going to enable estrogen to be recycled back into the body. So instead of eliminating it, it is going to be recycled back into the body, and that's when we can start to experience high levels of estrogen. So I talked about the estrobolome or the estrobolome, whichever way you want to say it, those bacteria that metabolize estrogen. The other part to that is something called beta-glucuronidase. So beta-glucuronidase is an enzyme that is produced by some of this gut bacteria. When it is in high levels, that is when we start to, like I said, recycle estrogen back into the body and experience estrogen dominance. So liver function, liver detoxification function, and then digestive gut health, elimination function is needed to have healthy levels of estrogen. There are some other factors that contribute to estrogen excess. Some of these are a lack of fiber in the diet, and that's because we need fiber to bind to estrogen and eliminate it through the bowels. A lack of healthy fats in the diet, because we need fat to make bile and also bind to estrogen and eliminate it. Alcohol excess is a really, really big one. Unfortunately, even one alcoholic drink per day can increase your blood levels of estrogen. So that is a really big one to consider, is how much alcohol you are drinking, because it will impact the clearance of estrogen. Mineral deficiencies and vitamin deficiencies are really big ones. Some of the nutrients we'd be looking at is zinc, selenium, iodine, magnesium for minerals, and then folate, B6 and B12 as vitamins that are needed for estrogen clearance. We'd also be looking at amino acids, so protein, because we're needing that for liver detoxification pathways. And under-functioning or underactive thyroid. So slower metabolism means slower metabolism of estrogen. So we need to then address the thyroid function. Bacterial overgrowth. So like I said, if we have any bacterial overgrowth, pathogenic bacteria in the gut that is making beta-glucuronidase, that will reactivate the estrogen and recycle it back into the body. And then the other really big one we'd be looking at is endocrine disrupting chemicals. So this is where we need to start to look at our lifestyle and our homes and our skincare and all of the things that are contributing to toxins and our toxic load. Pesticides, plastics like, BPA and phthalates, heavy metal toxicity, which is another one that we can experience, and they all impair our detoxification pathways and our estrogen balance. So next I want to share with you how we can support healthy estrogen levels through nutrition specifically, and through our lifestyle. So these are just general tips and suggestions. Obviously nothing here is personalized or medical advice, and you should always take this as information purposes only and discuss anything with your healthcare provider or work one-on-one with a clinical nutritionist or naturopath. But just generally supporting estrogen levels, the first thing we need to think about is our gut health. Aiming for 30 grams of fiber a day as a minimum is a really important one that is going to help with estrogen elimination. Now, if you're not eating 30 grams of fiber a day, I would definitely say slowly increase to that. If you increase fiber too quickly, we can start to get like bloating and constipation, because the gut's not used to it and you don't have the bacteria to break down all that fiber yet. So it's a slow increase. But fiber is really, really important for our digestive health and for eliminating estrogen through the bowels. There's also a lot of minerals and antioxidants and vitamins in our fibrous food sources that are going to be required for liver detoxification as well. So when we're looking at high fiber foods, think about your fruits and veggies first. Where you can, keep the peels on vegetables and fruits, obviously the ones that you can eat the peels for, and giving them a really good wash. I wash all my veggies and fruits in in apple cider vinegar and bicarb soda. So soak them for 15 minutes and then give them a good scrub with a veggie brush. Do that regardless of whether your produce is organic or not. Obviously, I'm sidetracking a little bit here, but organic produce is going to be more optimal for healthy estrogen levels because you're not getting the herbicides and pesticides from the food. But if organic produce is not possible for you, or not having total organic produce, you could also look at something like the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen and choosing potentially some of the Dirty Dozen list of foods that have the highest levels of herbicides and pesticides sprayed on them, and choosing some of those as organic. And then even your proteins, like your animal proteins, looking at grass-fed and free range eggs and things like that. I am sidetracking a little bit. We were talking about fiber and fibrous foods, and I was talking about fruits and vegetables there. So some of the highest sources, we'd be looking at apples and pears. I also really love, I shared on my Instagram recently, stewed fruit. So stewing apple and pears, because it increases the levels of pectin in there, and pectin is a particular type of fiber that's really beneficial for the gut. But some of the other really high fiber fruits and veggies are broccoli, kiwi fruit, and carrots. And then the other one we're looking at is nuts and seeds. So really, really big one. I love a lot of nuts and seeds in the diet, particularly seeds, I would say. There's a lot of good healthy fats, good fiber in there, but there's some other nutrients in seeds that are really beneficial for estrogen balance, particularly flaxseed. I'm going to talk about the phytoestrogens of flaxseed in a moment. But this is another reason why I love seed cycling, because it's a really easy way to get those seeds into the diet and then in turn getting that fiber and nutrients in. Some other high fiber foods include your legumes, like lentils and legumes, if you tolerate it. A lot of people don't tolerate lentils and legumes, or don't tolerate a lot of them. If you are consuming lentils and legumes, highly recommend that you prepare them properly. So they really need to be soaked before and cooked really, really well. So I think often some of the problems that come about with people digesting lentils and legumes is from not preparing them properly. So first point, 30 grams of fiber a day or high fibrous foods for healthy estrogen levels. Secondly, eating cruciferous vegetables regularly. Of course, this will contribute to your fiber, but cruciferous vegetables contain something called indole 3-carbinol, which is needed for the estrogen detoxification in the liver. So our cruciferous vegetables are broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and watercress. The next one is including some phytoestrogen-rich foods. So phytoestrogens are found in soy and flax seeds. Phytoestrogens are a plant-based weaker source of estrogen, and what it does is it binds to our estrogen receptors, and it can lower your estrogen if your estrogen is really high, and that's because it's binding to the receptors instead of your own really high, more active forms of estrogen. Or if your estrogen is low and you're not producing enough estrogen, it will bind to the estrogen receptors and exert that weak estrogenic effect. Now, what I would say is if you are going to consume soy, make sure it is a non-genetically modified, so non-GMO soy, and it's derived from whole bean sources, so like tempeh, rather than like your soy milks, which are, really quite processed, often made from GMO soy. The other one I actually really like is flaxseed, and that would be my preferred source of phytoestrogens, particularly because flax seeds contain other lignans and fibers in there that help to eliminate estrogen. And flax seeds there's a lot of good research around flax seeds supporting healthy estrogen levels, being supportive in perimenopause and menopause, being supportive in for PCOS. So there's a lot of research around it, and that is one of the reasons why I always recommend seed cycling as well, because it's such an easy way to include the flax seeds and the other seeds that are going to be supportive for your whole menstrual cycle. The next one I've already mentioned as being a contributing factor to estrogen dominance, and that is your alcohol intake. So if you are a moderate to big drinker, I would highly suggest considering reducing your alcohol intake if you want to have healthy estrogen levels. And that's because as little as one alcoholic drink per day can increase your estrogen levels. It's also a reason why regular alcohol consumption may increase the risk of certain types of cancers, estrogenic cancers in particular, like breast cancer. So just something to consider there is starting to look at your alcohol intake and reducing it, whether it be that you look at it starting during the week, if you drink during the week, if you are quite a heavy drinker on the weekends, starting to considering easing that off. And then lastly, another one that I've already mentioned is looking at your environmental toxin exposure or your endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDC exposure, and looking at going low tox. It is a topic that I am really passionate about as well. So over the years, I've really looked at everything in my home, my cleaning products, my skincare, hair care, body care, like all of the different things in my home, and even starting now, going a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole of looking at what's in my kitchen in terms of like I've got stainless steel pots and pans and cast iron pans. They're like the best for low tox, but I'm even looking at things like I've stopped using my rice cooker and I'm cooking on the stovetop because rice cookers have that like plastic coating on the inside. Looking at my bakeware and only using like glass baking dishes, and or like it is such a rabbit hole that you can go down, but there is studies to show that every little bit of every swap that you can make to a low tox alternative is going to make a really big difference to your endocrine disrupting chemical load, your toxin load, and then in turn support liver detoxification or take the burden off the liver, and then support healthy estrogen levels. I would say a really big one there, if you haven't started at all, is looking at your deodorant, number one, and looking at the plastics that you use. So whether that be plastics that you're drinking or eating out of, and your plastic exposure there. The next thing I want to talk about is testing of your hormones, and in particular estrogen. Now, blood tests are a really cost-effective and easy way to test estrogen levels, or test estrogen and progesterone, and look at that in conjunction with any symptoms that you're experiencing. The best time to be testing estrogen is day 3 of your menstrual cycle. So that is the 3rd day of your full bleed. Best time to test estrogen is then. Sometimes if you're working with a practitioner, we may look at estrogen again in the luteal phase in the second half, depending on symptoms that you are experiencing. And what that blood test is showing us is what your estrogen levels are in your blood on that day and on that day of your cycle. Now, if you are experiencing any symptom of estrogen dominance, if you have endometriosis, fibroids, if you're wanting to understand more about your potential or some of your potential risk factors for estrogenic cancers, is we could look at something a lot deeper and a lot more comprehensive. So the functional test, the Dutch test, dried urine testing for comprehensive hormones, is my absolute favorite test to do for your hormones. It gives us a incredible deep dive into how your body is actually metabolizing, processing and eliminating a number of hormones, including estrogen. And it looks at the 3 different types of estrogen we have, and then also the pathways they are metabolized down. What that means is that if there's any dysfunction, or if you have too much of a certain type of estrogen, or it's being metabolized down a pathway that is not protective, and I'll talk about these in a moment, we can utilize specific nutritional medicine, so like nutrition, supplements, lifestyle factors, to shift that, to change your biochemical state essentially, and to push estrogen down the more protective pathways to be metabolized effectively and then eliminated out of the body effectively, so that we're resolving symptoms. And yeah, it's such a great test. So I just want to talk a little bit more about estrogen from that perspective, or estrogen testing from that perspective. So one of the things that this Dutch test looks at is your 3 different types of estrogen. So we have E1, which is estrone. It is a weak type of estrogen. It gets converted to estradiol, which is E2. And E2 is our most potent form of estrogen. It is what we will see predominantly as menstruating, cycling females. And then we have E3 estriol, which is a weak estrogen, and it's more predominant in pregnancy. Now, estrogen is detoxified in 3 phases, and I touched on this before, but phase 1 is metabolism, and that's where estrogen is metabolized down different pathways, which I'll speak about. Phase 2 is conjugation, and that's when the body essentially packages up estrogen into safe little packages so it can be transported into the bowels, into the body, and eliminated. And elimination is phase 3. Now, phase 1 and phase 2, metabolism and conjugation, is what we're testing on the Dutch test. And then if you're wanting to look at excretion, that's when we'd be looking at like a stool test, like a comprehensive gut microbiome test. Now, when we're looking at phase 1 metabolism of estrogen, it will be metabolized down 3 different pathways. And this is something that the Dutch test will show, is how much of your estrogen is actually going down each of those pathways. Where that is really helpful is that these pathways can either be protective or proliferative and potentially contributing to estrogen dominance or some of those signs and symptoms, or even potentially increasing the risk of some forms of cancer. So those 3 pathways, the first one and the one that is the safest and the protective pathway of estrogen is 2-OH. So generally estrogen is metabolized down that pathway, or we want most of it to be, and it will bind to estrogen receptors with a lower affinity. We then have the 4-OH, which is the most problematic pathway, because estrogen will bind to receptors with a really high affinity if it is metabolized down that pathway. And it is the pathway that produces the most carcinogenic forms of intermediates. So that's where we're potentially seeing an increased risk of estrogen based cancers. And then we have the 16-OH, which is an okay pathway. It is proliferative meaning that it makes things grow, which estrogen is. It's proliferative, and that's where we can potentially see things like the fibroids and fibrocystic breast tissue. Now, once estrogen is metabolized down the 2-OH pathway, it is then methylated via our COMT pathway. So I'm getting quite in depth into this. I'm not going to go too much into it because I really wanted this podcast episode to be predominantly around estrogen and just some of the ways that we can support healthy estrogen levels. But I also, for anyone who's interested, wanted you to know about the Dutch hormone test and how beneficial it can be. So I kind of want to move on from here because the Dutch test will give us a lot more information about other hormones. So not just estrogen, but like cortisol, melatonin. We can have a look at how our adrenals are working and some other really great things that it can show us about our hormones. Bringing it back to nutrition. Now, I spoke earlier about the foods and nutrition that will generally help to promote healthy estrogen levels. I wanted to speak more specifically about each of these pathways that we can see on the Dutch test and how we can use specific foods depending on where our estrogen or what our estrogen is doing. So, for example, if you've got too much estrogen going down the 16-OH pathway, we can utilize the specific nutrients and foods to reduce that or inhibit that from happening, and we can increase the foods that promote estrogen to be metabolized down the protective 2-OH pathway. And this is just generalized. Obviously, we'd be looking at your own Dutch test and really specifically what's happening with your body and your hormones. But if we're looking at the 2-OH protective pathway, the things that help to increase this pathway is cruciferous veggies. So I spoke about having more cruciferous veggies in our diet before. Our phytoestrogens, so flaxseed and soy. Caffeine, which is a really interesting one. This is more like a moderate caffeine or coffee intake. We're not wanting to have excessive caffeine intakes, but a moderate amount of caffeine can be helpful. Fish oil. So we'd be looking at the omega-3s, EPA, DHA there. So fish oils or oily fish like salmon, sardines. It's you smash fish. Sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon and herring is your oily fish. Rosemary extract, and then if we're looking at supplementation, we'll be looking at indole 3-carbinol, which is the compound that is found in cruciferous vegetables, and DIM. Now, these supplements you have to be really cautious of. Reason being, DIM in particular, or even indole 3-carbinol, is whilst it can be helpful for helping to estrogen to be metabolized down this protective pathway. If you have low estrogen or if you don't have high estrogen, DIM will actually reduce estrogen, your estrogen levels, and that can be really problematic and can cause a whole host of symptoms as well. Things that slow down or inhibit this protective pathway and so the things that we want to avoid is a high sugar diet. So we really need to look at our refined sugars and carbohydrates. Not to say that carbohydrates are, we want to have carbohydrates in the diet, but certainly not too many refined carbohydrates or refined sugars, and having carbohydrates with protein and fats to keep our blood sugars in balance is a really, really big one. And then moderate alcohol consumption can really impair this pathway as well. So we're wanting to reduce our alcohol intake. Now, if we're looking at the other two pathways, the 4-OH and the 16-OH, so the less favorable pathways of estrogen, the things that actually increase estrogen going down these pathways, so which are the things that we want to, reduce or avoid? Inflammation in the body, so that's a really big one. We'd be looking at an anti-inflammatory diet to help there. Pesticides, alcohol again, smoking, and obesity. And then the things that inhibit these pathways, so can help to reduce estrogen going down these pathways, include flavonoids. So they are from certain fruits and vegetables in the diet or can be supplemented. Resveratrol, rosemary, grapefruit, and peppermint oil. Now, there are a number of other things, other pathways and other hormones that we can look at in the Dutch test, and we can get really specific advice on what supplements, nutrients, foods, lifestyle factors that we can use to inhibit or promote these pathways. So really getting that balance of not only of the levels of hormones, but actually the pathways that they are being metabolized down and then excreted. So that can be really helpful. Now, if you are wanting to look at your hormones more deeply and look at getting the Dutch test done, I am opening up spots for coaching under my hormone program later this year. So best way to find out about working with me is to download my free guide, and that way you can get started on actually balancing your hormones and making some little shifts and changes in your nutrition and lifestyle anyway. So I have a free guide that I'll share a link in the show notes. It is 5 foods that every woman should have in her kitchen for hormone balance. Download that guide. You will be added to my email list. You can, of course, opt out at any time. I don't send emails very often, particularly at the moment, so I'm not going to spam you. I absolutely will not share your email. But you will be on my email list. So when my coaching spots open up to be able to work with me and get testing like the Dutch test done, you will be the first to find out about it. And then the other way you'll be able to work with me this year is through my hormone reset program. Now, this is a really great way to get started prior to doing any functional testing or investing in functional tests, because they are an investment. And I would say before even investing in testing, you really want to get those foundations for optimal health and hormones in place, because that will make a significant difference and really move the needle when it comes to your symptoms, when it comes to improving energy and moods, and then getting you on the path to healthier menstrual cycles and healthier periods, and resolving a lot of those symptoms like PMS and heavy periods and PCOS. So my hormone reset program is a group coaching program. It is 4 weeks long. It is really about taking action. So there will be some education, but it is really there is meal plans and recipes and education, but really the actionable steps, and then the community and support through me. It's like having a nutritionist in your pocket for 4 weeks alongside the accountability buddies of everyone else in the group, so that you are actually gaining momentum and really getting on that path to optimal health and balanced hormones. So that will be starting later this year. It will be in October. I will talk about it in later episodes on the podcast once the dates are finalized. But again, jump on my email list through that free guide, and you will be the first to find out about it. So I hope this episode's been really helpful. And if you have any questions, reach out to me on Instagram at Tris Alexandra Nutrition. Thanks for joining us on the Empowered Flow podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd love you to share it with a friend and take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support means the world and fuels our mission to empower women everywhere. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at Tris Alexandra Nutrition. Sending big love. I'll catch you in the next episode.